Poland sends troops to the Belarus border, fearing threats from Russia via its neighbour. Warsaw's been central in helping Ukraine fight the war. But there's been tension too at times, just as with the EU. How will the Ukraine war affect Poland's future? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Sohail Rahman. Poland has been playing a central role in the war in Ukraine as a vital NATO bridgehead for supplies to its neighbour and a destination for millions of refugees. Since the end of the Soviet Union, relations with Russia have never been warm. The war intensifying enmities forged over a difficult history. Membership of the European Union and NATO has seen the former Soviet bloc country become a major nation in Western alliances. But at times, relationships have been strained and frayed. Just last week, tensions boiled over in a spat between Ukraine and Poland, with each calling in the other's ambassador when a Polish minister accused Ukraine of lacking gratitude. Intervention by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was needed to cool things down. Well, relations between Poland and neighbouring Belarus are seen as being at an all-time low. More Polish troops are being sent to the border. Leaders in Warsaw accuse Minsk of airspace violations by military helicopter crews and say that Russian Wagner Group mercenaries pose a threat. Poland was also angered by Belarus helping African migrants travel towards the Polish border and attempt to get into the EU. Tensions too surrounding Ukrainian grain imports into the EU. Now, Poland imposed its own grain embargo after Ukrainian supplies into Europe since the war began brought prices down, hitting Poland's vital agricultural sector ahead of a Polish general election in October. There have been calls to widen the embargo to include some fruit and poultry. While united with EU allies over Ukraine militarily, Poland is involved in serious disputes too. The EU's highest court, the European Court of Justice, says Polish changes to how judges are appointed are illegal. The Polish Justice Minister lashed out, calling the European Court corrupt. The EU is also withholding nearly $40 billion in aid to Poland, with serious disputes over green energy policies, coal mining and phasing out vehicles with petrol and diesel engines. There's strong unity, however, with the EU over Russia, seen as a direct threat to Poland.
There are all kinds of hybrid attacks right now on our borders, on the Lithuanian border, on the Polish border, which we have been seeing for the past 2 years. Russia and Belarus are increasing the pressure on our borders. They are increasing the number of provocations, and we have to be aware that the number of these provocations will increase.
Now, the Kremlin says Poland is becoming the most pro-US European power hostile to Russia.
There are existing risks associated with the militarization of Poland, which has become the main instrument of the United States anti-Russian policy. Warsaw announced its intention to build, according to the Poles, the most powerful army on the continent. In this regard, large-scale purchases of weapons have begun from the United States of America, Great Britain and the Republic of Korea, including tanks, artillery systems, air defense and missile defense systems, and combat aircraft.
Let's bring in our guests in Warsaw, Liliana Smiech, the president of the Warsaw Institute, a Polish non-profit think tank specialising in geopolitics and international affairs. In Berlin is Ben Aris, founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews. That is a business media company focusing on emerging markets. And also joining us from Poland's capital is Michal Baranowski, a senior fellow and managing director at the German Marshall Fund East, a non-profit transatlantic organisation. A warm welcome to Inside Story. Michal, can I start with you in Warsaw? Because Poland is spearheading the defence of Europe when it comes to any potential aggression from Russia and Russia's allies. Warsaw accuses Belarus of allowing Russian-backed Wagner troops of threatening an advance on its borders. How worried should we be?
Well, this all depends on what the Wagner group will do in Belarus. For a number of years, we have now considered Belarus as basically military space of Russia. Belarus is losing sovereignty. The Wagner group is coming. Nuclear weapons are coming. So that is very worrying. And Poland, as you said, is on the front of this confrontation with Russia, given that 90% of military aid to Ukraine goes through Poland, and Poland is becoming a strong NATO ally with spending over 4% on defense this year.
Ben, can I ask you the same question in Berlin? How worried should we be about the build-up of Russia's allies, you might say, on the Belarus border?
Well, certainly that Russia's been using Belarus as a launchpad for its aggression against Ukraine. And of course, in February last year, that it attacked from the north. That caught a lot of people out by coming through Belarus down to Kyiv. That's the short way of doing it. However, there's reports this morning on a Russian Telegram channel, Checker, saying that Lukashenko has actually kicked the Wagner troops out because he's refused to pay for them. We're waiting for confirmation on that story. But again, I think the Wagner troops have unsettled everyone because after their 8 months campaign to take Bakhmut, they've established themselves a reputation of being ferocious and effective fighters. And so having such a potent military force in Belarus has unsettled everybody, Poland in particular, which I think is partly motivated them to beef up the troops. Yeah. But again, Lukashenko is a bit of a loose cannon. The chances of Belarus and him specifically attacking somewhere like Poland, I think, are very low. Okay. But he likes to mix things up. He likes to build up tensions, and which he uses in his negotiations with Putin in particular. He has to be useful to Putin, and keeping Poland on its back foot is definitely useful to Putin.
Okay. Michal, certainly agreeing with you on that. But let's cross over to Liliana, also in Warsaw. Is it a nervous time for the thinkers in Warsaw, the politicians, the critics, the supporters, to try and work out what's going on Poland's borders? How do you assess the situation at the moment, especially when there is this talk of a build-up of troops potentially on the Poland-Belarus border?
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And directly answering your question, well, of course, the situation is very serious. However, on the other hand, Russia was also supposed to get Kyiv in 7 days. So we need to think about it as a reality. However, yes, the situation is very, very difficult. Also, Poland is spending a lot of money on defense, also investing in not just international military equipment, but also on our domestic one. So yes, the situation is serious. However, we also need to be realistic.
And of course, Liliana, before I go back to Michal about this, how do people assess Poland's membership of NATO? Do they think it's working in this particular context of other NATO countries also helping Poland defend its borders?
Well, I would say that NATO is our security guarantor, and I believe that majority of society would agree with me. So there's no doubt that this 2% that we need to spend on our defense is just the minimum. And also Poland is encouraging other countries to spend even more.
Michal, can I come to you in Warsaw? In your opinion, the Russian tactics are changing, aren't they, when it comes not just to Wagner, but the relationship with Belarus and with Lukashenko? They're friends, they're allies. Wagner is there 1 minute, then there's this talk of nuclear weapons. How strong is the relationship, and where are the weak points in that relationship?
Well, let me first just agree with Liliana about NATO's popularity in Poland, just so everyone knows. Poland is, in fact, Poland is the most pro-NATO country that we have in Europe. GMF will come out soon with a poll showing this as well. So there is no question about the popularity of NATO in Poland. And when we look to Belarus and Russia, again, especially the strategic community, the thinkers, the military, the politicians, are seeing basically a connected space. Yes, Lukashenko is there. Yes, he is the president of Belarus. But because of his crimes against his own people, because of his economic dependence on Russia, and now because of presence of Wagner group and nuclear weapons on his territory, we really should not consider Belarus a separate sovereign country. Putin could get rid of Lukashenko if he really wants to. Lukashenko's main goal is to remain in power because that guarantees that he is staying alive. So it's no longer any possibility for Lukashenko and Belarus to balance in any ways Russia and the West. It's firmly within the grip of Moscow, and that's why when we see maneuvers close to our borders in Poland, this is when we get concerned, especially about the hybrid tactics.
Indeed. Ben, let's come to you in Berlin, because it's interesting the perspective from Poland to where you are in Berlin. The Germans will have a very different take on it, but obviously, you know, you're a news agency that looks at the whole of Europe as one, as such. I mean, what's the perspective there about what's going on between the Poland and Belarusian border?
Well, as I said, I mean, Europe has been divided. That border was open before, in so much as before the war, there was a huge amount of trade between the European Union and Russia until the sanctions started to appear in 2014. And that border was wide open, and most of the traffic, there was constantly a queue of trucks crossing it one way or the other. And what's changed now is we have a fortified border. It's become a militarized border. In so much as Lithuania also shares a short border with Belarus, and it's recently closed 2 of its posts. Over the last 8 months, the Ukrainians have massively fortified their part of the border in order to stop a second invasion from the north, you know, threatening Kyiv. And now we're seeing that Poland has seen this incursion with the helicopters last week that shook everyone up. The threat of Wagner troops being in Belarus has unsettled people. And now Poland is also militarizing their part of the border. And if you remember, about a year ago, there was the migrant crisis where Lukashenko was sending thousands of, you know, largely Middle Eastern refugees across the border. And again, it was just open. I mean, people were wandering through the forest, and that's changed. I mean, there's now barbed wire fences, and they cleared part of the forest in front of the fence, and there's serious guards there. And we haven't seen that kind of militarized border in Europe for whatever it is, 70 years.
Time, yeah.
And it's returned a manifestation of attention.
Yeah, I mean, there are several issues that Poland's going through at the moment, and one obviously is this issue with Ukraine and the war in Ukraine set about by Russia. Let's just slightly move on to the relationship of Poland and the war and Ukraine. To the outside world, it seems a very cosy relationship that both Ukraine and Poland have. But there are issues between Poland and the rest of Europe on a different front with the EU and the Court of Justice. Liliana, can I come to you about this and about jurisdiction, about sovereignty, about who really is in charge of Poland? Because when you have that ingrained, you might say, or set in stone, only then can Poland deal with its neighbours and its international partners. This has not been resolved, has it, between Warsaw and Brussels?
Well, indeed, I would say that the relationship between, as you said, Warsaw and Brussels is quite complicated. However, this crisis, this problem in judiciary system, as you also mentioned, has, I would say, 2 dimensions. First of all is the political and also the substantive level. So yes, I agree, the judiciary system, yes, still needs some reforms, and we can also hear from some of the representatives of government that actually there are some plans to reform it if they will win their 3rd cadency. But there's also another component of it, which is a political dimension. Even, just last year when Ursula von der Leyen visited Warsaw, she had a meeting with our Prime Minister Morawiecki, and it seems like the conflict was resolved, and probably the Next Generation Fund will come to Poland. However, it didn't happen. So I believe that till the Law and Justice is in power, it is possible that Poland will not get the money from the Next Generation Fund.
Indeed. Michal, can I come to you in Warsaw? This is an issue that is grinding on as Poland heads towards a general election. And yet some analysts, and if you read what's on the internet and the people that we're speaking to at Al Jazeera about this, the incumbent political party has been very good at demonising its opposition and demonising minority groups, all in the space of saying this is for national sovereignty and national security.
Yes, indeed, that is the argument, but it is very firmly rejected by all the European and, in fact, broader than European legal authorities. There is really no standing that on the issue that the changes that the government introduced in the legal system fall within the rule of law as other European countries have. There is, the issue and this conflict has been almost resolved, as Liliana pointed out, but it was in fact President Duda who didn't sign the law. President Duda, coming also from Law and Justice, who didn't sign the law that would correct some of the biggest issues with rule of law. So I think there is relatively little expectation that if Law and Justice wins the upcoming parliamentary election on October 15th, that it will be that camp that fixes the issues of rule of law. I think there are expectations that Poland can begin to a longer process, in fact, of going back to a judiciary system that has a level of independence only under a different government than the current one.
Whether that happens or not, we still have to wait and see. I mean, Ben Aris in Berlin, President Biden was actually in Poland earlier in the year, espousing or extolling the virtues of freedom and democracy. Around the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, it all sort of fell at the right time, you might say. But it sits uncomfortably, doesn't it, with the US having to make alliances, as some might see, with countries that have rather questionable wouldn't say domestic internal politics and issues over human rights. It's not just Poland, it's Turkey and India as well.
Indeed. I mean, we at BNE cover the entire region, and we see this in a regional context. And I think Biden had to go there and give that message because Poland needed reminding about the democracy part. I mean, the judicial reforms are effectively giving the government, the ruling party, a tool whereby they can pressure the courts, which is you're supposed to have separation of, the judiciary and the government. And the Gallup did a very interesting poll several years ago and found that there's a values fault line that runs down the middle of Europe. And although Poland's bought into the European Union membership because economically it's worked fantastically well, in so much as Poland gets some 9 billion euros a year in reconstruction funds. And to put that in context, before the war, Ukraine used to get 3 billion. So it's a lot of money. And Poland has flourished. In 2008, it was the only country in Europe that didn't go into recession. But they haven't really bought into the values part of the EU project. And again, this fault line of values, if you look to the east, Poland's on that side, and it adheres to these more sort of traditional, in its case, Catholic conservative values, and the rest of Eastern Europe, Orthodox conservative values, where family is the most important, where it's a much more sort of authoritarian top-down kind of administration rather than the liberal democracy that we have here in Germany, for example. And that's actually a problem. It's a work in progress, and they haven't... Please, I mean, I'm controversial, maybe, point of view.
Yeah, Liliana, you want to come in there?
Yes, well, I disagree with some parts of your speech because you're talking that we didn't imply, European values. I wouldn't use this kind of word because Poland welcomed millions of refugees, and it is a world phenomenon because we didn't create any of the refugee camps, as for example Germany did, but we welcome all of the refugees to our houses. So we gave our hearts to refugees, and I wouldn't say that we didn't imply European values, because European values is, for example, solidarity. And that's what Poland exactly showed, not just the political elites, but the whole society.
Well, thinking of that, let's cross back to Michal in Warsaw. And of course, you know, while sort of the global community looks at Poland's reputation right now as, you know, heroes and the vocal support and the military support they're giving to Ukraine, there are underlying tensions between the two countries that have been there for many, many years, hundreds of years, if not. You know, one man's hero, such as Bandera for Ukraine, is nothing more than a monster for Poland. And these issues rumble on, do they not? And this is why even President Zelensky had to get involved recently.
You're absolutely right that Poland and Ukraine have very difficult history. And we have just had an 80th anniversary of Wołyń massacre, where lots of Poles as well as Ukrainians have lost their life. But the war brought nothing less than almost a miracle, I would say, in terms of the depth of Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation. As Liliana pointed out, Polish society welcomed Ukrainian war refugees to our homes, and that history has really become a history. It echoes from time to time, but I cannot imagine us going back to the difficult political relations caused by history that we have seen before the war. Again, the depth of the reconciliation between our two countries is irreversible and nothing that I would expect 2 years ago before the war started.
Sure. Well, history might not be echoing in the same way that what's happening is resonating right now, Liliana, in terms of the grain deal, because there is friction between Ukraine and Poland over cheap Ukrainian grain heading through Poland and to the European markets, and that's upsetting Poland and its agricultural finances and belt. I mean, how is this all going down at the moment? Because Poland has embargoed Ukrainian grain, certainly until mid-September. That may continue, and that might upset the EU.
Well, I would say it's not just a problem of Poland, but all of the Central Eastern European countries, because our main branch of the economy is indeed agriculture. And yes, indeed, the farmers were quite upset because of the lower prices of the Ukrainian grain. So, yes, in this case, the interest of producers has won over the interest of consumers. However, I believe that we will need in the future, if not now, some kind of interference of the European Commission to solve the issue, especially if we are thinking about the future accession of Ukraine in the European Union.
Ben, can I bring you in from Berlin? How much does an issue like grain imports impact on domestic politics? It's certainly when you're heading towards a general election, and this is a hot topic at the moment in Poland.
Exactly. Look, this is a very interesting topic, and it says quite a lot about the complicated and difficult relations everyone has here. In so much as Ukraine now is completely, almost completely bankrupt. Its only hard currency earner is the grain exports. And with the naval blockade in the Black Sea and the collapse of the grain deal, that it's been trying to get as much grain as it can out by train going west, which arrives on the Polish market. And as Liliana said, that collapsed the local market and upset the local farmers. And so the government in Poland banned it, blocked. But this is Poland, Ukraine's biggest supporter. And yet at the same time, they've cut them off from the only source of money that they can earn at the moment in trade. And the reason why is obvious, is because the election's coming up and the agricultural lobby is extremely big and powerful. So Poland's been forced to make a choice between supporting its ally, Ukraine, and dealing with domestic issues, winning an election. And it, at the end, chose its own agenda, its elections, and actually has hurt Ukraine to the point where the Ukrainians banned sugar exports to Poland, which, again, Poland is a big importer of Ukrainian sugar, and that caused a problem. The solution, Poland's asked the EU for $1 billion in compensation. So I think that's what's going to happen, is throw some money at it. But it underpins that the Western Europe wants to support Ukraine, but at the same time it needs to, or wants to, limit the amount of economic damage that's being done to its own economies. And so this war can't go on for too long, because it's already costing Europe a lot of money. But as both Michal and Liliana said, that Poland in particular has shown a lot of solidarity, and the rest of Europe has been prepared to take a lot of pain for the sake of Ukraine. And that's European value in that sense.
Michal,
and that will
so let me just jump in with Michal and just ask him then, how important is it to try and restart the grain deal and try and get, you might say, Russia on board, address Russia's concerns that its products weren't being sold internationally, and that it also questioned whether the grain that was leaving Ukraine was going to poorer nations around the world. It really did question that. What's your take on the way that subject is being discussed in Poland?
Well, Russia's naval blockade of the Black Sea obviously causes huge repercussions throughout the global south, especially when it comes to hunger. And that could be really fixed easily by President Putin just signing the grain deal again. Some of this grain can be transported through Poland, through Romania, but it will not replace the ports of the Black Sea. So here, the responsibility for the hunger just lies very clearly with Vladimir Putin. I do think that we'll need to find a longer-term solution because Ukraine's agriculture sector is so large that it would require huge changes to the European agriculture policy. It will when Ukraine will become an EU member. So this is something that we'll be grappling with for the years to come, certainly throughout the EU.
Well, we are coming to the end of our programme. So, Liliana, I'll ask you the last question. In terms of the relationship now between Poland and Ukraine and Poland and the EU, in your opinion, what is of most value right now to Poland as politicians, you might say, sell their political position as they head towards that general election in the autumn? This is all going to ramp up as the weeks progress.
Well, I would say that the relationship of Poland and EU and relationship between Poland and Ukraine are completely different things. Relationship between Poland and Ukraine is strong and it will be strong. Poland will be supporting Ukraine. It is supporting Ukraine and will not stop. Our relationship with EU is something completely different. So I wouldn't even bind those two things because Ukraine's independence, Ukraine's sovereignty is also our goal.
Interesting conversation that I'm sure we'll be revisiting again in the coming months. It's been great to have you on this edition of Inside Story. Liliana Smiech, Ben Aris and Michal Baranowski, thank you for joining me for Inside Story. And thank you as well for watching this edition. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Now, you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sohail Rahman, and the whole team here, thanks for your time and your company.